Unconvinced. Believing means submitting to an authority. Having once submitted to it, you cannot then, without rebelling against it, first call it in question, and then once again find it convincing. Wittgenstein. A very popular error, having the courage of one's convictions. Rather, it is a matter of having the courage for an attack on one's convictions. Nietzsche. We have convictions only if we have studied nothing thoroughly. Cioran. When Nietzsche writes, "It is not the conflict of opinions that has made history so violent, but conflict of belief in opinions, that is to say, conflict of convictions," he does all of those who hold on to their convictions without going to war an ill turn. Some of us feel that, at the end of the day, our convictions are all we have left. After arguments, opinions, and points of view, interchangeable like educated guesses, fall away, if one gives credence to the skeptic, as one must. Convictions, however, remain with us because they fall under the jurisdiction not of reason, but of passion. And, pathos-driven, they are considered blind. Their sharers, fellow travelers on the scissor-gated lift of conviction, whether or not they share the same belief, are invariably after their own heart. One cannot step on and off, as with the paternoster of rational argument, whenever one decides to, risking being cut in two, winding up of two minds, in other words. Violence is precisely the work of reason, with its just reasons. When they are not defended with conviction, reasons are, at least provisionally, held by their bearers to be unassailable, inviolable, while themselves violating our entire passional structure of thought. When, however, conviction comes to their aid, they hide. Conviction rarely turns volatile, let alone explosive, without some fanatical reason behind it, which it protects and conceals, and for which it takes the blame. It is the fire to reason's spark. Conviction in and of itself has no great ambition, being principally concerned with its own survival, as is clear in its Polish name, przekonanie, through konanie, the agony of dying, and less so, which is perhaps at the root of Nietzsche's condemnation of it, in the German Überzeugung, whose stem, Zeugung, means conception, procreation, and whose prefix got its reputation from his followers. Etymologically, the Polish word evokes lethal force, marking its agent as a convict. Yet it denotes a state or condition that results from convincing, whose violence, absent reason, is anyhow exaggerated. One might narrate it as follows: the bearer of conviction is one who has survived an act of belief and bears this new conviction, even when the legacy of brainwashing, not as a cross but as a treasure, having every right to defend it to the death. So you see in this willingness to die for what almost killed one only a cycle of abuse? I assure you, it's all fully consensual. This, then, is the thrust of having the courage of one's convictions, maintaining one's intellectual integrity and/or independence of thought, and not, as with absolute truths, striving to overthrow all others. The blessings of intellectual passivity. Opinions grow out of passions, which are fiery hot. It is by no means the inertia of the spirit that lets them stiffen into convictions, but its lauded cooling effect. And when they stiffen, they do so in its defense. But such formulations are anathema to those who vilify conviction on principle and in practice. They assume that conviction, with its pathologically conditioned optics, is only extreme fanaticism, self-sacrificing adherence to precisely one or another absolute, unqualified truth. Nietzsche calls convictions converted lies, converted but not eliminated, a case of Lutheranism. They are clearly no denials of untruth, but neither are they truth denials. Rather, they are dogmatic embraces of untruth as absolute truth, and for that reason, more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. They are motivating yet unexamined, imperative yet undiscussable, deeply held yet general, public. They have, for him, no range, but are uniformly negative, sick, suspect. Conviction is also aligned by its basher-in-chief with personal gain, hunger for recognition, and power over others. On the question of gain, Nietzsche does not see convictions as what they plainly are, one's own beliefs, passional intellectual property that, in their particular constellation and value, are non-fungible, mine alone. Such strong attachment and sense of ownership is absent from the domain of reasons, but it is conviction's connection with, and co-option by, truth that I want to foreground. Conviction is the belief that on some particular point of knowledge one is in possession of the unqualified truth. This belief thus presupposes that unqualified truths exist, likewise that perfect methods of attaining to them have been discovered. Finally, that everyone who possesses convictions avails himself of these perfect methods. Nietzsche's assertions and inferences still apply to fanatics everywhere, particularly to moral fanatics, whose devotion lends sublimity to their truth. Putting to one side facile syllogisms, fanatics are not all convicts, which is to say, men or women of conviction, and not all convicts succumb through reason's machinations to fanaticism. In point of fact, the person of conviction breaks from absolute truth and ventures out on a limb where he or she is vulnerable, but where integrity bids them go. And such people, habituated not to offense, but to defense and survival, are the best armor of fanatics. With conviction for a shield, absolute truth can be even more active and daring, in a word, fanatical, advancing and conquering new territory with the persistence particular to it. Nietzsche welcomes the instrumentalization of convictions for the sake, not of truth, but of skepticism. Among the unholy means willed by the great skeptic, who remains above them, they are only acceptable as the willed means to a willed end. There are many things that can be achieved only by means of a conviction. Great passion uses convictions and uses them up. It does not subordinate itself to them. It knows its own sovereignty. He recognizes that some credit must go to conviction, or what he labels as such, for what is dear to his heart. If the individual had not been concerned with his truth, that is to say, with his being in the right, there would have been no methods of inquiry at all. But with the claims of different individuals to unqualified truth everlastingly in conflict with one another, men went on step by step to discover incontestable principles by which these claims could be tested, and the contest decided. This is why Nietzsche encourages us to attack convictions, but attack on what grounds? Those of reason and justice, of course. The eternal violence of history has its positive side. Without convictions, there would be no scientific sobriety. Little by little, the war between competing absolute truth claims has given shape to scientific inquiry, a series of steps meant to settle whose truth can in fact qualify as next to absolute, which is to say irrefutable. There is, it must be said, no better way towards consensus than a hard and fast set of rules to disqualify individual players, rules that cannot be argued with further, whose indisputability has about it a whiff of the open grave. And yet, make no mistake, conviction is fundamentally discontinuous with scientific truth. The man of convictions is not the man of scientific thought. He stands before us in the age of theoretical innocence and is a child, however grown up he may be in other respects. It does not seek scientific self-proof, rather it assumes. It arrogates for itself all kinds of truth without qualification or distinction. This, by Nietzsche's lights, is its cardinal turpitude, though there seems to have been some debate in his mind about whether childhood is not perhaps the best cultural state. Nowadays, however, we no longer so easily concede to anyone that he is in possession of the truth. The rigorous procedures of inquiry have propagated distrust and caution. so that anyone who advocates opinions with violent word and deed is felt to be an enemy of our present-day culture, or at least as one retarded, and typically as a fanatic, resident, and picturesque. And the pathos of possessing truth does now, in fact, Nietzsche continues, count for very little in comparison with that other, admittedly gentler and less noisy pathos of seeking truth that never wearies of learning and examining anew. But does science itself, if not we, actually side with skepticism? Their contiguity is far from obvious. A clever maneuver on the part of scientific truthers, by playing both sides to stake a claim to moderation. The scientific spirit in men has to bring to maturity that virtue of cautious reserve. Bring forth virtue. Why, of course. Zeugung, conception, procreation, and Überzeugung. It makes you appreciate really how fertile man's scientific spirit is in its conviction. In an age of skepticism, when, despite science's best efforts, consensus is harder than ever to come by, conviction can finally return to grace. From alleged defender of absolute truth and antithesis of provisional scientific truth, it may turncoat to become friend of no truth at all. As St. John Cassian reminded the faithful, excesses meet, and extremes are known to flip into their opposites. And how do convictions fare in the culture at large? By far the greater part of all educated people, even now, still desire from a thinker convictions, and nothing but convictions, and that only a small minority wants certainty. Insofar as genius of every kind maintains the fire of convictions and awakens distrust of the modesty and circumspection of science, it is an enemy of truth, no matter how much it may believe itself to be truth's suitor. Well remarked, and even better said. Convictions, opponents of both minoritarian judgment and of genius, counting that of justice, are still fashionable in the culture at large, and newly so, because they are taken to be opposed to lies, mistakenly, as Nietzsche says. Being anti-lie does not make them absolutely true. In a supposed age of skepticism, then, the coast is clear for convictions. And with predatory genius away, why shouldn't they come out to play? The beings who did not see things exactly had a head start over those who saw everything in a flux. As such, every great degree of caution in inferring, every skeptical disposition, is a great danger to life. No living being would be preserved had not the opposite disposition, to affirm rather than suspend judgment, to err and make things up rather than wait, to agree rather than deny, to pass judgment rather than be just, been bred to become extraordinarily strong. How now? The cat genius proves deadlier to itself, weaker, biologically weaker, than the mice. Second nature is like Marx's camera obscura of ideology, without the lie that is ideology. Just as the immoral and the immoralists have an edge on those who are not like them, so Homo volens, murine, gets one over on Homo rationalis, feline. And the will to play is continuous with the will to get away.